Raton down on the Palo Blanco.
And how many sections would you guess they had down
They had 10,000 acres and more. They had quite a large, in those days, considered a large cattle ranch.
You should have told the rest of the story. How about the spurs?
Yeah, I've heard that.
You cut that off a little short.
Oh, well, what was it, Bob?
Well, the fellows were out on roundup, but they just rounded up the cattle out on the plains, and they was on roundup. And that evening, just about supper time or about dusk, why these 6 Spaniards came riding into the camp. And the horses were pretty well beat, and they wanted to know if they could eat supper, which of course in those days was just courtesy to anybody that came through, chuck wagon, they had them eat. And so they got off their horses and ate supper with them, and which one was it? One of your uncles admired the spurs, or was it your dad's?
Rich.
Or your, okay,
Uncle
Rich.
Rich.
Admired the spurs of this one big heavy-set Mexican fella, and he was riding an unusually large horse because he was a large Mexican, and he admired the spurs. So they went on, and then the fellas asked if they could spend the night. So the old boy said, well, sure, throw your bunk down or your bedrolls and spend the night. And so they did, and turned the horses in with the remuda to graze during the night and freshen up a little bit. And then in the morning, why, when they was eating breakfast, why, Rich again mentioned the spurs. And so they ate breakfast, and then the Mexicans asked if they could get some beans and stuff to take with them, if they needed some supplies, and they were just going through the country, so they said. And so they gave them some supplies, and when they got ready to mount up, why, this heavy-set fella took off his spurs and gave them to Rich. And he thanked him and offered to pay for him. Didn't have much money or anything, but he offered to pay for him. The Mexican said, no, you've been real nice to us and gave us groceries. Said, you just keep the spurs. So they took off, and then along that evening then, why, here comes a posse of about 12, 14 riders coming in. And they rode into the camp and wanted to know if they'd seen any of these Spanish riders going through. And they told them, yeah, they spent the night with us last night. And they said, well, they're wanted for bank robbery up in Kansas. And the posse was chasing them. Said, how far are they ahead of it? And they said, well, at least 12 hours now, because they spent the night and they left here early this morning, right after sunup. And so I don't know whether the posse went on looking for them or not, but they were far enough, 12 hours, they'd be away down from Raton down toward Wagon Mound or down in that area, headed for the Rio Grande River to get back into Old Mexico. But that's where the spurs came
That's where
from.
we did. Now, Bob,
Isn't that right? I mean, that's the
right.
story they always
I
told me.
didn't hear all the story. Bob knows more than I do about, because he used to visit with the uncles all the time.
Oh, yeah. They were always very courteous. All of the miners and all of the prospectors were real courteous. I don't know why. When my brother and I were just young kids, we could go by their cabin, take them flour, sugar, tobacco, go in and visit with them. They'd always have you to a meal or whatever. If we went fishing up to the lakes, they always asked us to bring them some fish down, and they'd fix up the biscuits, and we'd have fish and eat with them in the evening. And we did.
And that was up on the up Placer Creek, you see, when they had their cabin up
On the Golden
on the
Treasure
Golden
property.
Treasure.
Well, how did the Pancho, did the posse say that was Pancho Villa?
Yeah, they said it was Pancho Villa.
Yeah,
And
they
so
said
they
it was
assumed that
Pancho
the
Villa.
heavy-set Mexican must have
Yeah.
been Pancho Villa.
Uh-huh.
That's right. He was Pancho Villa
Yeah.
and his 5 other, there were 6 of them. There was
6 of them.
all together, and the other were just nondescript Mexican, big white sombreros, Spanish Mexican saddles on their horses.
So where was this ranch located?
It was south and east of Raton, out toward Capuan, am I not right?
Yes,
Out in that,
about 17 miles from Capuan.
out in Capuan there.
They used to go to the Dorsey Mansion to get their mail there at Chico Springs, is that what it's called?
Well, we used to go there. We used to ride horseback to get our mail. Well,
Okay, now, excuse me for
that was,
interrupting.
no, I'm so glad you told that story. Because I said, Bob knows more stories like that than I do. He used to visit with the
The
uncle.
uncle would tell you, yeah, sure, they'd get
Yeah.
talking and tell you.
And
not only them, but all the other prospectors.
Oh,
too.
yes, all of them. He knew all of them, you know. Well, this picture, did you ever go over to Catskill, Bob?
Coke ovens over
Well,
Catskill.
those are the charcoal ovens. It's, as a crow flies, it's only about 50 miles from here. And the ovens, they're still standing just like they are. We went over there a few years ago, and the first oven had been run through with the bulldozer, and I won't mention any names. It was a party out at Cimarron, and he had the wood contract, the timber contract up there, and with his bulldozer he went through.
He's going to tear them down.
He's going to tear them down. And but he lost his contract for the timber, and he had to go up and replace it and rebuild it.
Now, it's on private land. You can't get in without permission.
It's on the
now.
Vermejo. Our Dad's first ranch was just a short ways from Catskill, up in there, up the Little Red River it used to be called.
They had the railroad track going in there too.
Oh, yes, they had a railroad
York
track.
Canyon.
No.
Going on the tracks and stuff, a lot of them do.
The ovens, aren't the ovens up York Canyon?
Well, I think, of course, you know the pictures over here, you've all seen them. Then we have E-Town, Elizabethtown, a portion of it. Of course, Hank can tell more about that than...
Not me. I don't even
Don't-
have a picture of it.
You don't? See, our mother was born in Elizabethtown when it first started. Our grandfather met his wife, grandmother. That was when it first started, way back when, 68. So you see how old I am. Well, I guess that's all in here. Only over here we have a, when you leave, you can see the picture of the old Red River Pass built in 1916. And the wheel that is dated when it was quite new, built by the uncles in the early days. But
Tell me, your one uncle was more or less an architect. He,
Yes.
I guess, didn't have
Of
formal
George.
schooling, but George could sit down and to scale draw these water
oh
wheels.
yes, we have the plans down in the museum.
George drew
He
that
drew
one, and
everything
then they
scale.
had a big water wheel on the Golden Treasure, Golden Calf property there for their arrasta. They used them as an arasta.
It was 30 feet in diameter.
And that was the ore crusher then.
Uh-huh.
Yes. So I believe that's just about all.
This is your wall over here.
Well, this is Walter's my wall over here.
How many
Somebody
brothers
knew
did
my
you have?
husband and some of you didn't.
Whitaker, did you just have two brothers?
But
Were there two brothers, George and Rich?
Reed.
Your uncle?
Reed,
Oh, Reed, yeah, I
Nat.
forgot about him.
There were
They
four-
lived right here.
Four
They had a
brothers.
wood stove right there, and we'd come
Yes.
and throw the ashes out the door there. you know.
Not here. Not here,
In
Tilly.
case you want, it was
No, not that.
Rich
Wasn't in
A.
here. It was
Oldham.
another cabin.
Richard
No,
A.
we ate
Oldham.
right here. It came right here in this room, right in here.
Uh-uh.
Right
And
there.
then there was George L. Oldham.
See,
Now,
now,
Walter and I built this.
oh, you did?
Oh, yes.
And then there was M. Reed Oldham. Am I right?
Yes.
That's what I have.
Reed.
M. Reed Oldham, George L.
And,
Rich A. Richard
Rich,
A.
Richard Allen.
And then
And our dad
and your
was
dad
Nat.
was
Nat.
Nat.
Nathan Coombs.
Yeah, Nathan.
Nathan Coombs. And they still tell the story about Nat and Rich. Did you ever hear the story? They still tell it in Raton at the club, at the Kiwanis Club and the different clubs. And this story is about 100 years old because it's when they rode the open range. And it happened that that our dad, Nat, worked on a ranch up on the Sugar Eats. But Rich came in, it was the Palace Bar, it was the old palace. And he came in at the bar and he bellied up to the bar with all the rest of them. And this one man said, "Well, I thought I left you on the ranch working." supposed to be Dad's boss. Rich says, I'm rich, I'm not working for you. And he said, well, the boss said, when I leave the ranch and give you something to do, you're supposed to do it. Now, they're just young men now, maybe 19, maybe 20. So Rich, he's tall and slender, and he tipped his hat back on his head. He always did that. He says, I tell you, I'm rich. I'm not working for you. And the boss said, well, I don't give a D if you are rich. When you're working for me, you're supposed to work. So later, he didn't know that they were twin brothers, and they were identical twins, and their names were Nat and Rich.
Well, I didn't know they were twins.
Oh, yes, they were identical twins. Our mother used to say, I hope I married the right one.
Well, the land that this house sits on and your land around, did you get that through the mine patents, or how was this land?
This land here,
Uh-huh.
that's another story. You want to hear it?
Uh-huh.
Sure.
Um,
Why don't you sit down? If you're maybe too tall, better.
I understand.
Oh,
I
stand
understand.
up.
I never
Can't
talked,
think, sit
didn't
down.
I? 1920, our family, our family came up on a camping trip, 1920, and we had an old Dodge car, and we were loaded to the gills, and with a trailer, and the sideboards, they had a running board, you know, and the sideboards were all piled up with suitcases and stuff. And we came down to Red River Pass, and we parked and camped near the Little Red Schoolhouse. And we pitched our tent, and there were several neighbors, those cabins then, people all occupied them, and we looked, and everybody was looking out of the windows at us. And I told Mama, I said, you know, I can't stand all these people looking at us. So Dad said, well, let's pack up and move somewhere else. So we came up the canyon, and there was a nice flat place right here, and a big old barn. Dad said, that looks like it's nice. I'll go down. There's a house down there. I'll go down and see if we can park, set our camp up. It was right in front of the old barn. So Dad went down to the old log cabin. Mr. Melton was down there. And he said, yes, you can set up your camp there. So we did, and we stayed here about 2 weeks. And Dad fell in love with this place. And Mr. Melton said it was for sale. So Dad and Uncle Rich bought it at that time. And it was purchased for mining headquarters because the other two brothers, were up on the hill mining. That was Uncle Reed and Uncle George.
Because they were up there around 1900.
Yes, well, they first came in 1894. Uncle George came in 1894, and his oldest brother, Lonnie, from Trinidad, was already here. So he must have been about 1892. George and Reed were working on the railway, and they went out on the strike in 1894. And that's when they came up to Red River.
Was that the railway down by?
In
Cimarron?
Raton.
In
The
Raton.
Raton Railway just went through in '79. And that was a big deal. Everybody was working on the railroad, or they had cattle. And that's about in 1894 when Uncle George came. And in my wagon days in Red River, he tells about coming down when he first stayed at the little town of Franklin up the canyon. But that's how they acquired this place for mining headquarters. what it is today, it was never heard of. Then. And then one day, people were fishing, about 1922, 1923, and it was raining real hard. And they went to the door, the old log cabin, that's where we have our museum now. And they asked if they could get shelter from this rain. And all at once, it gave Uncle Rich and I said, we'll build some cabins. We'll just have them for the fishermen in the summertime. And that's what started it.
Great, thank you.
I have in my notes, it's later than that. See, we didn't get our first tourist really until 28.
Well, it was earlier than that, Bob.
Yeah.
The Walter and I were married in 24, and we spent our honeymoon up here. And one or
I
two...
mean, there weren't many tourists or foreign people
very
coming
few.
in before 1928 really looking for some place
No,
to stay.
but
or-
a few people had come up here. Because we spent our honeymoon here in 24
24.
and occupied this little cabin that you're speaking of, Jill. That was here. It's not here anymore.
You know the Warrenburgs?
Yeah.
White Mountain. Well, they used to come camp.
I'm gonna come over here and let's start. down
In
a
those
little bit.
days, the road did not come through here where it is now. The road came down through, almost down where the museum is.
Oh, yeah.
And came right up the bottom of the river through Young's Ranch and went up this way. So the road was not up to where the present road
See,
is
we
now.
changed it. Walter had it changed in 35 when we first came up here. Because it just cut the place in two. And we had a few cabins at that time, so we changed the road. Where it is now. 2 men with pickled shovels.
Well, are you all ready to start talking about the mines? Bob, you want to start with, which one did you say?
Well, if you want to start at the bottom and go up, or here in the valley, or wherever, Ed Westerby had a mine right between here and Young's Ranch and had an arasta down here and a water wheel that he ran water out of the Red River.
And Uncle George built it.
And Uncle George built that rasta, or the water wheel for it. And that was really
That's your one.
the first start of mining right in this particular area, and then it drifted up the Placer Fork area. And they did find some placer gold along up and down the canyon, mainly where the East Fork and the West Fork of Placer come together below the Buffalo mine. They had some free gold in there that they could pick up in a gold pan occasionally, and that brought in the hydraulic unit. And at one time they spent a year and a half with a big hydraulic unit trying to wash out the gold and see if it was pay dirt or whatever, so it would be worthwhile.
About what time, about what year was that, just to kind
I
of
don't know
guess?
whether they list the,
Was it like early 1900s when that was going on?
yes,
Okay.
yes, it was in
Well,
that
that's
time.
close enough, we don't,
We can
I
go
don't
right
know
through
if
the
they
books
listed
and
it in
get
here
the
when they
exact
had
ones.
that.
And so that was the west of these, and who else was working the hydraulic?
Well, I imagine the uncles worked with him, didn't they,
Well, I
as far as I
imagine they
know,
did.
since
They
they
were-
built the water wheel.
They worked together on several
Several
of the mines.
mining ventures here, and I just assume now there's no record that they worked there on that.
It was called Millside, Westerby Millside.
Mill site, yeah.
Well, tell us something about their personalities, these people that were working. I'm interested in the excitement, what kept them doing that. If they had a cattle ranch, did they work the ranch part of the time?
Well,
And
our
then-
dad and uncle, Rich, the twins, they were on the cattle ranch most of the time. But I think all the money they made on the cattle ranch went up to the mine for the two brothers worked.
yeah, they were,
But they all got, of course they just
Well,
knew
they got
they
some
were
pretty
going.
good veins started, didn't they? Had
Yes.
Some
Well,
really,
they struck a lead, they said.
and it was
And they
hard
was-
to get the ore out, was that it?
They, the story goes, when they struck their lead and they were run out of the high water and they had to run for their life, the water just gushed in the mine. Did you hear
It
that?
was a
Bob?
shaft, yeah.
It was a shaft.
It was a shaft.
Which mine was this?
That was one of the golden treasure mines.
That was the golden treasure.
Golden treasure. Now the misconception a lot of people have about the golden treasure and the golden calf property that the uncles had up there, you know where the old unfinished cabin is as you go out of Placer Fork up on the ridge. Well, the golden treasure 1 and 2 mines were on that ridge down along between the 2 canyons of Placer Fork. And then they had the one shaft there that had the ore in it, and the water ran them out. So then they went up the ridge a little ways and sank another shaft. They say in here that their shafts, some of the shafts were, I don't know whether I have in my notes, some of the shafts were anywhere from 75 to 150 feet deep, can you believe? And the water then, when it came in, ran them out. Then they went down in the canyon and tried to drive a tunnel back in to drain the shaft so they could work the ore. In these particular shafts, I think is where they got 1 or 2 of the nuggets that you have in the museum down there that came out of the shaft. Then they went back, when the water ran them out, and they decided it was too much work to try to continue working them. Then they went back and started the golden calf and golden, what was the other name? Golden calf, maybe it was 1 and 2.
Just the golden calf, as far as I know. And it went back 300 feet.
Yeah, the golden calf was a tunnel. Well, first they had a shaft on it that was up on the road going to Goose Creek Lake. Off to the right was the shaft. And they had pretty good showing of ore in that. And there, that claim tied into Endemann's claim where he had the water wheel. And so then they went back down, and when you go over to the cabin, which is the Golden Treasure Cabin they call it, you go across the dump of the Golden Calf mine. And then they sank that tunnel back in there to try to get back to drain the water out. The water's still running out of the tunnel as you go across the dike of the tunnel. And then did they have the Golden Treasure before they had the Bunker Hill? Did they work it, or did they work both of them pretty much together?
I think they were pretty
Both
much
pretty
together.
much the same time, because then they went on up over into what's known as Molly Mac
Molly.
Gulch. It's where the stream comes down off of Gold Hill, comes down through there, and comes down into Pioneer Canyon right above the Inferno mine, between the Carabel and the Inferno, where the stream comes down. That's Molly Mac Gulch. And so then they went up there, and this is where J.O. Gill had the Bunker Hill number 1, and they started working it. And then they took on the Bunker Hill number 2 claim, and they sank this shaft, and the shaft on the Bunker Hill went down, what was it? The shaft went down to 322 feet. They had a horse whiz on it, and they built a framework over it so they could work in there in the wintertime. And the horse whiz was a winch that they took a burro or something around that would rotate an arm, that would raise the bucket up, dump the ore, and then they'd reverse the mule and go back, and the bucket would go back down. And they even worked in there in the wintertime, had the building covered. You can still see the semblance of the shaft and the workings that are there. And then they took on a lot of other claims. They thought that was going to be real rich. And they had the old Fish Eye claim, High Cost claim, the Alamo claim, the Middle Fork, the Princess, the Liberty Bell, the Expansion, the Raton number 1, Raton number 2, Raton number 3, and they had the Big Flat claim is where the came back this way onto the ridge, that the road going to Goose Creek Lake goes right up along the edge of the ridge and right past some of their claims. And on this side of the ridge they located the IT claim and the Nashville. Those were the names of the claims, and they are in the book here as I have drawn off. Well, there again, the shaft got so deep and the water ran them out of it. They couldn't pump it out. So then they went on down Molly Mac Gulch and put down another shaft, which was about 75 to 100 feet. They thought maybe getting lower, they could pick up the same vein, and it runs into this rotten porphyry, they call it. And as you'll see on a map, if you want to look at the book, on page 24 shows the more or less the way the land lays in this area. And you have your chalcopyrite overburden, and then you come into your galena, which is a vein goes down through, and this is more or less in the Mississippian land time, and goes on down, and then they hit a big dike of pyrite, and the pyrite, quartzite down through there is all rotten, and everybody thinks, all the geologists think, that down below that is where the gold lays, but that can vary anywhere from several hundred feet to almost a mile in depth. So they never did get down to the gold that they were looking for. And then they came back down and worked some more on the golden calf claim, which in the summertime my brother and I used to go up and we'd help them. They had a wooden ore car built of wood with steel wheels. They did not have rails in those days, so they took the poles, flattened the poles, and nailed a strip of metal on top of the flattened poles on two sides to use so the car wouldn't tear up the rail and they could haul the ore in and out of the claim. The old ore car was up there, and after World War II, when I started opening up some of the roads, which were full of trees and one thing and another. I had the first Jeep in town, and went up there. The old car used to sit on the dump, which most of them did. Nobody ever bothered them. And 3 days after I opened that road up and went up to the Golden Treasure property, I went back and somebody had picked up the ore car. Well, I was sick as to who had gotten the old ore car, and I hunted around town till I finally located it, and not mentioning any names, I did find it. And after he died, I finally talked the widow out of the ore car, and I still have what's left of the old ore car.
I'm glad you have it.
I've been going to set up, but it is wooden, and it won't last out in the weather, so I don't have it outside. The same thing happened on the other side of the Golden Treasure property. They had dropping off down into Goose Creek Canyon was the Munden Jack Amos claim. There was an ore car on that dump, and I went in there, opened the road up, and went down with my Jeep. And I was thinking of opening that tunnel because Munden and Clapper always claimed there was good ore in that tunnel. And I thought, well, the ore car was there, the track was there, all I had to do was re-timber the portal and get back into the tunnel. And I took several samples of the ore, sent it in for assay. Typically it comes back 3-4% gold, traces of silver, actinolite, various minerals like that. Well, a week later I went up, the ore car was gone, some of the track was gone, and I had to hunt and find who got it. Well, Jack Dunn had apparently followed me in, and he picked it up. It was down at Little Enid. Then he went around to several of the other claims and picked up the cars, and then I quit going to any of the claims because either somebody was watching me anyway, I quit going because he had picked up 3 of the ore cars in a period of at least 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And so I just quit going back to any of the claims unless I intentionally was going to work them. And I guess that's all the history I have on the Golden Treasure, unless you want to add something to
Well,
it.
I think you covered it very well, more than I could.
Now, up the Placer Fork Canyon, the first was the old Myrtle Mine. They had a tunnel that went in right side of the road. You still see it going up. And there's a dike of porphyry rock up there, and there are, according to Dr. Nathrop in the Minerals of New Mexico School of Mines, says that dike has the crystals in it known as name of it right now. But you can see the dike is all impregnated with these crystals. If you want to dig some of them out. The mill operated for about 2 years and then shut down. So then they went on up the canyon and came to the old Buffalo Mine, which was started and operated, what do they have on the Buffalo here? Buffalo Mine was previously called the Silver King Mine, and they operated it in what they call the Blue Rock Tunnel. They drove the tunnel to a south-westerly direction, and the ore vein was quite rich to begin with, and this was later in 1910, the Buffalo, New Mexico Mining Company was formed. That's where they sold the stock then, and then they built the smelter on the outside and thought since this vein was running quite rich, it doesn't say how much, and I never did hear what the assay was on it. Then they went ahead and staked at least 13 additional claims, all tying together, that went both over the ridge and clear over into the South Fork of Placer, or they always call it South Fork, now they call it the East Fork. And they drove that tunnel completely through the mountain, came out into the Placer Fork, and the gold just disappeared. They tested over there, they ran samples, they went across the creek, and they never picked up the gold vein after it went through the mountain. So that pretty well killed the Buffalo. Now, they did open it back up when they had the Heartbreak Mill in the lower end of town. Jack Brandenburg, Elmer Janney, any number of the fellows went up there, and they opened up the tunnel again, going to try and bring some of the lower grade ore or some of the side veins of ore down to the Heartbreak Mill, which was down at the lower end of the Red River, built in 1932 and 33. But there again, and all of the others, Dick Kushner was going to bring ore down to it from the Memphis mine. They opened up the old Independence mine up Bitter Creek to try and bring ore down to the Heartbreak Mill. But there again, it was such low grade, and that primarily was a stock promotion deal held by the name of Dodd and Spooler. And when they first came in here, they practically walked in packing a pack on their back, and when they went out and sold stock in the Heartbreak Mill, they came back driving a 1920 2 or 3 Packard automobile. Then they worked the mill for about 6 months after that, and then one night they just disappeared, and that's all of the Heartbreak Mill. And
do you remember the house that's still standing there? We call it the Dog House, between that Spanish eating place, you know, where I had the cafe. That was a dog house right next to Westerby.
Yeah.
Between us and Westerby, but it wasn't there when we came, you know.
No.
It was just Westerby had all that land.
Right. So then went on up above that, and they came to Old Man Compton's mine, will be the next tunnel going up Placer Fork. It was known as the Silver King, later called the Sylvia, S-Y-L-V-I-A mine. Compton worked it. He put in quite a tunnel there. I don't know, 800-900 feet of tunnel. And he had the cabin right alongside of the mine tunnel, so he didn't have to go far to get up and go to work. But he never did get anything out of it because the vein in there is in a tertiary andesite volcanic formation, and it does not carry gold. I mean, that particular formation does not carry gold. And then on above that, you come to the Jayhawk mine, and the Jayhawk has quite a history of different ores. They sank a shaft of over 50 feet right along the side of the road, which is still standing, half full of water. And then off of the shaft, you'll see in the map here, they ran back and added several hundred feet. And there again, they picked up traces of gold and silver, but they never did really find the rich vein on the Jayhawk. It never did pay off. This lists that there was a mill there. I never did know of a mill. There were several buildings that were bunkhouse and cook shack there on the Jayhawk back in the 30s that I remember being there. But they also took ore from there down to the Junebug Mill, and that's where Junebug Campground gets its name. Bud Kushner's dad had a mill on the bank of the hill there above the Junebug Campground. And they hauled ore down there. The Molly Mine hauled ore up there in 1919, 1920. The Molly Mine hauled ore up to the Junebug Mill for processing. And
Was it molybdenum or what they were hauling?
they were hauling the molybdenum ore up there then. It was still a flotation type mill, which the concentrates will pick up molybdenum, gold, or silver out of your flotation mill. And it says here that they took out over 1,000 tons of ore and treated it at the Junebug Mill out of the Jayhawk mine. And
Bob, excuse me, did the Kirchners have Junebug?
the Kirchners did. Dick and Bud, and their dad, what was the father's name? Somebody help me with it?
Well, I don't know the father's name, Dick. That was
Dick.
Garnet's. Dick was Garnet's.
Yeah, Garnet's
That was Dick.
Kirchner.
You don't know his
The father was the one that started all of the
Yeah.
mill and the mines up in Bitter Creek, the Memphis.
They had a beautiful home in Raton.
Mhm.
It's still there.
The books, this one and the one we've read before, all said that there were several reasons why none of the mines in this area really made it. One was low-grade ore, and it was hard to get because of so much quartz.
Overburden and quartz
Uh-huh.
had to be crushed.
The other was that some of the people really didn't have enough technology behind them. They probably could have gone farther had they had more expertise in mining. Did you ever hear that?
Well, probably this is true. I don't know that any of the old miners ever went to school, through high school even.
Well, how did they learn? This is my question.
But mining-
How did they learn what to do? Did they know about it?
Well, they studied, not just like the uncles. They were always studying geology, books.
Did order
They never-
books and
That's
stuff?
all they ever read.
We have our books now.
Oh, you
Uh-huh.
do?
Oh, yes.
I have 2 or 3 of the mining books from Old Man Crow that he gave me before he
And they just,
passed away. Has his name in G.B. Crow, was given to me. And they studied and read and any of the old mining books.
And then did the miners help one another? Did they get together and talk, or were they secretive about what they had? Do you know?
I think they pretty well talked. They discussed the ore
I think
veins,
they
they
did.
discussed the formations, and then, like I say, there was always the geological books. You could always write to the schools of mines. Colorado School of Mines was always very helpful if you wanted information. And you could always send in your rock for assays, and they'd come back, they'd tell you exactly what was in the rock. They could tell you
and of course,
whether
they
it was
learned
quartz
from
or
all
not.
the assays they sent in.
They studied their assay reports and learned from them. They knew where they took the assays, samples in the mine, and if one locality was richer than another, then they take off on that vein. Because in your mines, in your tunnels, everything is in a vein. Your rock formation, even you can see it along the road, there is a definite vein or a definite formation that you can follow. And if one vein showed to be richer than another, then that would be the one they would follow.
Another point that the books made was that there were 2 things in terms of investment and transportation. To find investors, and they had to have the money. You had to be kind of a good salesman, like the guy that bought him a Packard. He must have sold real well.
They went back. There was, in fact, the Oldham brothers sold stock, didn't they?
They sold stock.
They sold stock in the Golden Treasure. That's why the old unfinished cabins are there. That was to be the boarding house and the bunkhouse. After they had sold a certain amount of stock, they were going to hire a big crew and go in and try to pump this water out and finish the shafts that were there then, or was still
They
standing
really
open.
believed it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they believed in it.
They actually
And it's
could
just
invest
like,
somebody to put their money in.
The fellow up Pioneer Canyon known as Uncle Billy Anderson. Everybody called him Uncle Billy around Red River. And Uncle Billy believed in his mind so strong up there one summer when I was about 14 years old, he talked my dad into letting me go up there and help him. Very legally, he made out a form, recorded it in the Taos County Courthouse that I was a half-interest partner, 50-50. I was to help him, and he said, if we can just get another 5 feet this summer, he said, we're going to strike it rich. And that 5 feet, so we went up there and worked. The old tunnel is still up there, you can still go in it. And we had to single jack the holes, which single jacking you started out with a piece of steel about a foot, 18 inches long. You increased it, you hit it with a 3 to 4 pound sledgehammer, turned it a quarter of a turn and hit it again. You drove those holes in your solid rock and cleaned them out. And that's where he put the charges of dynamite in that pulled the thing out. He used the steel wheelbarrow. So we hauled the ore out of the tunnel. And that was primarily what I did, was the single jacking and hauling the ore out in that wheelbarrow, the muck we called it, or the miners call it muck. And when we started in, we had assays of 1/2 to 1% silver, 3% gold, traces of actinolite, which is a tin-bearing ore, and we had traces of molybdenum, we had traces of galena, I guess. There was traces of galena in it, which is a lead ore. There's lots of galena showing up in this parts of the country. And when we we worked all summer, and we pulled about 9 feet that summer, which was beyond these 5 feet. We took a sample of it, and I went back to school, and the assay report came in from Denver. We had lost the gold altogether. We had 1/2 of 1% silver. We had no actinolite. The galena had played out. In other words, the vein had just completely faded out. There was nothing there. So then the next spring he came back, and he wanted me to help him again, which I went up part-time. I didn't work all summer for him that summer. And we started a side adit there, and the old man was still working that side adit when he died in the miners' hospital in Raton. But he believed in it. If he could just get that extra 5 feet, and they all did. That was the theory that they went on. That the last assay showed such and such, and they'd sit down and talk about it and go over the assay reports, and then.
Well, some of them, according to what I read, the money played out. If they had a little bit more money, they probably could have found more ore. Is that
Probably.
true?
This is probably
Some of them,
true.
the vein played out, but some of
It's
them.
just like now the outfit that has staked the Ajax mine. 2 years ago, they were up there and they core drilled now, mind you. And down at about 80 feet, somewhere in that vicinity, near as I could get from the core drillers, they hit a vein of 6-inch quartz, just 6 inches wide, 6 inches deep. They think when they drilled through it. But in this quartz, your core comes out of a core drill, which is hollow, and you can bring it out, and you know just how deep it is to your core drill. That's the purpose of core drilling. And this piece of quartz, 6 inches long, was just laced with gold. You can see it in the cuttings of the piece that they had. They had it down and brought it down to the post office. I saw it was down. They were staying at Terrace Tower, where I happened to find out about it. And they were thrilled to death that at about 80 feet they hit this vein of quartz. That's why the work is being done now on the Ajax mine. They have bulldozed the road up on the ridge, they core drilled up there, they bulldozed the road back up onto the top of the ridge that joins the old Golden Treasure shafts, which would be just below them on the ridge between the two placer forks. And they core drilled up there last summer. What they hit, I don't know. They kept it very secret. You also have a man that's taking, that is staked the property up at the old Enderman property, and he has put in a bulkhead for his shaft, is about all he got done last summer. He took up all of the property, and I think he's taken up some of the Golden Treasure property near as I can gather from his footages. He goes 2,000 feet down the hill on his claim, and he is going to open up the old Enderman property and see if he can't get down to the gold in that, which I seriously doubt, because there again, it'll be deep.
Before Uncle George passed on, he said to me, he said, don't spend any more money on it. The ore is all too deep.
Well,
See, gold was cheap then, you know.
Yeah.
Now you, $400 to $500
That's why
an
they're
ounce,
coming
you know what I
back,
mean?
yeah. Well, Mr. Faru in Trinidad, you know, when I went to Trinidad and talked with him over the telephone, that's really the reason they stopped at the Carabel, is the bottom of the gold market fell, and they lost, they used.
Then we
a lot
went
of
off the
money.
gold standard too, you know.
Yeah, so those were the things, but also that the books say that the lack of a railroad up here,
$12 and $15 an ounce is the gold they were working.
and they couldn't get it shipped out. They couldn't pay to get it shipped out because it wasn't to a good place to mill it, or what.
Transportation was so
yeah.
expensive.
Closest, there was one mill at Pueblo, Colorado, and there was one mill at El Paso, Texas. Now, Gerson Gersdorf took took ore off of by wagon off of the old ridge on Gold Hill of his rebel chief, the Shoshone and the rebel chief mines up there. Took it by wagon down Rio Hondo Canyon, across the John Dunn Bridge, clear over to Tres Piedras, shipped it to El Paso. And the returns from that was very, very low. I don't guess he got, $300-400 is probably all he got out of that, near as anybody could find.
And they were, not many people worked for wages, they just worked hoping to strike it rich. So.
Well, the owners did. They would hire people. You could hire help for $1 a day.
Yeah.
They'd go in the mines and work for $1 a day. This is back in the late 20s, the early 30s.
But
And
they
a month you got
themselves,
$30, which was a lot of cash money then.
Well, I have a question. Of all, who did you know, Bob? Who did you meet and talk to personally?
Oh, I knew old man Enderman. I worked with, like I say, Uncle George Anderson up there. Spent the whole summer working with him. I knew George B. Crow and the Oldham brothers real well. I knew old Joe Kennard that mined and prospected and trapped up on the head of the Red River. Spent many a night with him. And then, of course, the ones around town, old Horace Johnson, Will Johnson, worked for Will Johnson 31, 32, and 33. My brother and I ran horses for him, and my mother cooked for Dolly Johnson in the cafe down at 31 and 32.
Okay, these men that you knew, can you describe their personalities? Like Joe Kennard, he's always fascinated me. What was he?
Joe
like?
Kennard was kind of an eccentric.
Were they all eccentric? Were they all eccentric men? I mean, they had to be special men.
Take one at a time and describe them for us.
Joe Kennard, was a Frenchman.
Yeah.
And, of course,
It's the
Well,
video.
describe him. Have you ever heard about Joe?
A little bit.
I
Describe what he
have
looked
a
like
picture of
physically.
Joe Kennard. He was rather short. He had long arms. In fact, his arms were almost down to his knees.
Oh, I'm just-
You would see him all through
He
the
comes to
trees.
the post office every day, with long hands.
he was always going down. He'd walk down. We had this tree out here. When the road went up in 1970, they were going to cut that tree down. And I went out and I said, don't you dare cut that tree. Joe Kennard, we named it Joe Kennard, because he put his snowshoes, he kept his snowshoes on that tree every time he came down in the winter, So we call it Joe Kennard's tree, and it's grown to be a beautiful tree now.
Well, now, Bob, tell where he lived. I don't know.
He
exactly.
lived.
He has a house up there, they still call it Kennard House.
No, the house is torn down
Oh, is it?
has the property in there where Russell's Lake is. He had a long cabin. In fact, there was 3 cabins joined together, end to end. I mean, he built one, tied another cabin onto it, and tied the third one onto it. And it was right there on the bank. And when Jim Shuttlesworth bought the property up there, he tore the cabin down or burned it.
So
Now,
it should
the
be on British
interior
Shore.
of the cabin, his old bed, his old stove, and that went up to Murphy. Wanda Murphy, in their cabin up there, has Joe Kennard's old bed, his old stove, and some of the things out of the cabin is up at Murphy's.
And Murphy brought the old table down that summer,
Oh,
down in
Good
the
for her.
museum.
okay. That was Joe Kennard. Now,
Well, you said
Joe
you,
walked down back and forth. He'd walk the 6 miles from up there at the lake down in town here, the 6 miles young, get his groceries and get his mail. And he'd come down every day or every other day or depending on what he was doing. If he was working one of his mining claims, he didn't. Now, the last deal when Dudley Hickman was bulldozing the road up West Fork, up to his claim. It belonged to Joe Kennard up there where, what is it up at Mirror Lake? Boston bought it from Joe Kennard. That was Joe Kennard's claim, and he was having, he and I guess Boston together was having Dudley Hickman bulldoze the road up there. I went up with Dudley one Sunday when he went up to Greasy's tractor and was going to do a little dozing up there, and he said I could, he'd teach me how to run the dozer, I guess was what the deal was. I went up with him. And when we went around through where the road takes off, old Joe Kennard was there apparently waiting for us. He said, I want to ride up the canyon with you. So he rode up, and just before where the deal takes off to go to Middle Fork Lake, he wanted off. And he asked us when he'd be back. Dudley said, he said, we're going to grease the crack tractor, and Bob's going to play around bulldozing up here some on the road. Joe said, okay. He said, I'm going up to my mine up here on the hill, and he said, I'll either be waiting for you or you wait for me, but I'll meet you here about dusk. And so we said, okay. Well, old Joe went up to a mine up on that ridge. Now, don't ask me where. He just took off up through the timber there on that, and it's a steep side hill. Why he didn't go on up Middle Fork and cut back, I don't know, but he went right up the side of the hill. And we went up and worked, and sure enough, when we came back that evening about dusk, old Joe said, look, I want to show you what I got. And he had 3 gold nuggets in his hand. The biggest one was about not quite the size of a dime. He had one about as big as your fingernail. And he had 3 gold nuggets. He said, I dug these out today. Now, whether you could believe him or not, I don't know, but that's what he told us. And then, of course, the war came along. We went to the war, and I was gone, and Joe then went out. Now, Joe gave all of his claims to the guy in Taos where he stayed in the wintertime.
Stayed at the Columbian Hotel all the time.
Well, he stayed
In Carabas.
there on, but he stayed down at that old Orchard Court. You remember that
Yes.
old, and that belonged to,
Yes,
Like
he
the
did.
Captain
He
Taylor.
stayed there sometimes.
no, what was the name years?
See, he lived at the hotel when he died.
Was it Tigers?
No. I can't think of the name. Anyway, he left all the mining claims up there to him for taking care of him there at the place. And now Joe, like I say, was real friendly. He never talked about his past. Horace Johnson and some of them around town said he came to this country for his health, and that was just a few jumps ahead of a posse. And for stealing horses somewhere in Texas. And others said no, Joe said he came for his health because he said he had to live on barmy. He chewed tobacco, and he set out these big traps for bear around. I ran his trap line with him many a time. They were great big traps, about yay big. He'd build up a pile of logs 4 feet high, bend an aspen tree over there, and hang a bucket of honey or sugar water over this trap. The bear would climb over the logs and reach for this and fall down in the trap. I've seen him kill a bear, a good-sized bear, black bear, brown bear, 400 or 500 pound bear with a hatchet. Reach over the head and he'd like that, bear stick his head up and you hit him right between the eyes with a hatchet.
Well, he left his family, and that's when he came out here.
And the Indian Victor helped him run the trap line the last year or two before he died. And then I think old Victor went around in the summertime, he'd take the traps out and hang them in the trees. Now, I went back around over the old trap line after I came back in 46 or 47 after World War II. I found one trap still hanging in a tree. All the rest of them had disappeared. I don't know what happened to them. I do know one of them was in the drugstore in Taos there. They bought it from old Victor the Indian, and I think he went around and got them and sold them.
Now, what year did he die? Joe Clark. Do you remember?
Offhand, I don't remember. It was while I was gone. I have it written down in my notes and stuff down home. I have it written down, I can tell you.
Well, just as bad as somebody has it written down.
I have it written down when he died.
In the 40s.
Yeah.
It would have to be the late 40s because I used to take him home, you know, after he got kind of sick. He'd
Feeble or
walk
break,
down.
he'd walk down and then
Yeah.
somebody haul him home, you know.
And then he'd walk back up fast and park and stand there and holler for me.
Oh, yeah.
And he would come up because of the dogs.
Well, it must have been after Uncle
So
George
that-
passed away.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, it was after Uncle George.
Well,
died.
Uncle George passed away in 48.
Well, Kennard wasn't living when I came back from the war. I was in Los Alamos and came back, I was 40,
Janine was born in 48, so it had to be right around 48.
right around 48.
Okay. When was Janine born?
He must have been.
Well, who was another colorful miner?
What about this Anderson you were talking about? Was it, did you say Billy
Uncle
Anderson?
Billy Anderson.
Okay, didn't he have a place where Johnny and Hank lived?
That's where Hank lived. They tore down the old log cabin, didn't they, Hank?
Yeah,
You
but
built
I
a
didn't
little
know.
three-room
I
house
just,
there.
you know, Pratt's is all I ever knew. I didn't know.
There's a little log cabin there where Hank's little house is. That three-room house, and he lived there, and then
Oh,
Hank
you
and
mean
Johnny.
those little bitty cabins that used to be out there?
A little old log cabin, yeah.
Yeah.
There was
A log cabin.
Yeah, Uncle Billy lived there. And then there was another cabin. Pete Del Dorso had the cabin down there where the,
Community house.
well, no, where Don and,
Buchanan?
no, where,
Williams?
well, for crying out loud. Right this side of the community house. Johnson and Company. They tore that cabin down when they put in the Navajo court.
Uh-huh.
And then there were several items in that they gave to the community house. Some of the old Red River Prospector papers and stuff was in Pete's cabin. And the McCaslins bought the properties, built the Navajo motel there.
Oh, yeah.
You remember?
Yeah, but I forgot who did it.
Taylor,
No, it's
not Taylor McCaslin, but the other McCaslin.
yeah.
And they tore that cabin down. And then, well, there were just others who were torn down.
Bob, this Billy Anderson, in some of my notes, I have where he was very good at building log cabins. He was almost a
Well, they were all good at that. It's like this shaft that goes down the Molly Mac Gulch. I've tried to take a picture of her too, and my camera's gone bad now. There's a shaft I can show you the Oldham brothers put in that hasn't caved in yet at the top. And absolutely, there isn't a timber in that whole shaft down. It's, what, 60, 70 feet down. And it's just as straight as if you would lay it, every one of those timbers. And in a shaft, it's real difficult to timber because you have to timber from the bottom up. You dig the ore out, and then you put your cribbing in, and you timber then down to where your last digging was. But you have to dig from but you have to shore up and timber from the last timber and go down. So it's in reverse of what you would do if you were timbering and coming up, laying it like bricks. This is done upside down. And this shaft that the Oldham brothers have down there is just as straight and perfect and symmetric as
Now, that's the Molly Mac?
no, it's down in the Molly Mac. It's on the Raton group of claims down there.
You know,
It's a beautiful shaft. Well, I'm still going to try and get a picture of it.
anything they did, it was always just.
And they could use an axe and chop or an adze. They used an adze a lot. And it's like when the Oldham brothers were squaring the timber there on two sides. They take these little poles 10, 12 feet long. And they lay that down and flatten that just as flat on the top and on one side with an adze or an axe. Take it in the tunnel and lay it, and it'd be perfectly flat to run an ore car on. Nail a piece of steel on top of it. They all used axes and adze and look at the timbering in the old Golden Treasure cabin, the old unfinished cabins up there. Look how neat they're timbered and how square the logs are in.
I've noticed those.
But that old LaBelle Hotel is the same way.
And the LaBelle, yeah, it sure was.
The little mailbox that we have out here is built like a log cabin Uncle George built in,
Yeah,
just like a log cabin.
they did. Both went on at the same
Yeah,
time.
we got them timed right, I guess, we'll get another time.
Oh, well, it's just like our store. They set them back there every day, which I have to, but they're every one of those, it was only with an axe. But every right, cut just perfect to fit, and it looked like it was grew that way.
Now, that was Warren.
Yeah, I
built
knew Warren,
that, but no relation.
Yeah, I found that out from John. No, yeah, Army.
Well, Bob, what kind of person, I'm interested, I'm like Nancy, I'm interested in their personalities, like with Billy Anderson, did you enjoy being with him?
Oh, sure, he was friendly and real, well, like I say, I don't know your personality,
I'm not sure you got to know the people that well.
Well, see,
They were
that's what
not
I,
that-
that's what I.
They were friendly, but they weren't. Most of them were friendly, but not that friendly.
they never, none of them ever talked too much about themselves that I know of, other than, like I say,
Mr. Enderman had folks, they'd come in every summer and visit
They
Mr.
come.
Enderman, and he'd be in Miners Hospital, you know, and he died there, you know. He was up Bitter Creek, Mr. Enderman was.
Yeah, Enderman was up there. I don't know, I just say they were ordinary
Just
people,
ordinary
just
people.
ordinary
Billy Anderson
people,
didn't
and
have
they-
anybody, he didn't have any folks at all.
Who?
Billy, Uncle Billy.
Uncle Billy,
Anderson,
no, Uncle
he
Billy
didn't have
Anderson didn't
anybody.
have anybody.
Dick Kushner used to tell us that an awful lot of would never talk about their past.
No.
In other words, their life began when they lived here.
That's
in
right.
the valley, and that was it. And he said that.
What
They
about
got
the
to go to
road
that
school
school.
together?
You ever know that? Yeah, he told me one time. You know, that, and then the guy that had the rock garden up in
Oh, Crow, I knew Crow real
Well,
good.
that's
That Crow.
George B. Crow had the rock garden up
When
there.
I first came here, that rock garden was just gorgeous.
Beautiful.
You know, it just had
We took
sweet
people
where.
there.
I wonder what happened to all that stuff.
A lot of the people dug up the flowers, I don't know, now old man Crow claimed to have been around the world twice. I have a gold nugget that he gave me that supposedly came out of the Klondike gold rush. He claimed he went to Alaska and was in the Klondike gold rush.
He had bad dogs, remember the dogs? You know, and he charged everybody a quarter to go through his lands, you know.
To see his museum, when you rode up, he would
Charge a
charge
quarter,
a
you know.
quarter to the tourists there.
And the forest came in and he had the road open, he had the road enclosed, you know. You couldn't go. But then finally the forest came in and fenced him off.
Bob, what kind of museum did he do?
Oh, he had stuff that he had brought around just to his travels. He had a pair of Dutch shoes that he carved out of a German propeller out of World War I in a trench. He had them there. He had minerals from all over. I mean, he collected minerals and had a case of minerals there on the wall. In fact, Ruth Yeager has his mineral case. She hauled it down. She and Pasquale Martini brought it down in about 1935 or something on a horse, and she had it in there in her
Don't
Red
forget the
River
Mobergs.
room.
The Mobergs up
And,
there.
yeah, the Mulbergs up Pioneer, old man Mulberg and Oscar and Harry, and but like you say, a lot of them you didn't quiz them about their past. If they wanted to tell you anything about it, they would. We never quizzed them about their past. And now the uncles, they talk about the ranch out there. That was how they told me the story about the spurs and how they talked. Yours is recording. I brought an empty cassette of mine. I thought I had the other one, but I didn't.
Well, Bob, what happened to Crow?
He died at his niece's house in Arizona. He would go down there in the wintertime. He would leave most of his stuff in the claim up there and or in the cabin and go to Arizona for the winter when he got older. And but he had minerals. He had a box, like a cigar box, maybe a little longer, out of wood. It was about that full of gold specimens from all over. He had uncut diamonds from the Kimberly diamond mines. He claimed he worked in them. And he'd take out one of these wooden boxes and show you, and he'd say, oh, this is a straw diamond. He said it'll cut out to a beautiful yellow diamond if it was cut.
Just a minute, Bob, I'm afraid we're missing something.
Mindful.
But
What happened to his stuff? What happened to all his stuff?
he always had them stashed out. And he was always going to leave them to the governor's palace in Santa Fe. He was going to leave word with his niece where they were. But he never did. Apparently he went, passed on, and he'd sleep, and he never did tell his niece.
So they're stashed
They're
out
probably
somewhere?
still stashed
But
up
they're
there.
still up there.
Charles F. W. Young and myself and any number that knew him have gone over that with metal detectors and Geiger counters. And Charlie Young brought back, right after World War II, brought back one of those old mine detectors that had the square box on each end. We went over a bunch of that with that. I don't know.
Johnny and I were riding horses up there one day, and there was some guys up there just absolutely demolishing that cabin, tearing up the floor.
Tearing up the floorboards, they thought it was under
Because
there.
everybody heard,
That he had this collection. He had, I don't know, I had the geologist, Martin from the Molly Mine, wanted to see some of his collection, and you'd have to go up and make arrangements ahead of time, tell him what you wanted to see. He'd never bring it all out at one time. If you wanted to see the gold, he'd bring out the gold. If you wanted to see the opal, he'd bring out the opal. If you wanted to see the diamonds, he'd bring out his box of diamonds, but he never brought it all out at once. But
Oh, when you got there, would he have it?
he would have it if you made arrangements.
So he probably had it stashed in
He
different
had it
places.
stashed somewhere. Now the boxes generally had an old green moss on them, and the only place you can get that greenish white moss is in a mine tunnel. If you've seen the timbers, you know how they'll fuzz over. I always thought it was in his mine tunnel, but Charlie Young and some Spanish boys opened up the mine tunnel and went way back in the tunnel, and they never found a thing. So nobody knows what or where it is. But one time, Martin down at the Molly Mine, the geologist at the Molly Mine, had gotten to see most of it, and he estimated that he had somewhere between, this is back in the 30s there, 36, 37, he estimated that old man Crow must have between $20,000 and $25,000 worth of minerals. And the niece from Arizona had been up. He had a big old stem wind watch in one vest pocket and a big gold chain down here. And on it he had a gold nugget that was about that long, had a hook in it like that, and was real pitted and rough. He called it his peanut gold nugget. Anybody that's seen him around town, you've seen it. He always wore that gold.
Yeah.
Now the niece in Arizona told me she has that. The gold nugget, the big stem wind watch, and the big heavy gold chain. And on the other end of it was his toothpick, which we won't name where it came from, but he had a toothpick on the other end of it.
When they would come in, after Walter and I moved here in 35, in the spring, they would all arrive and would like to go down and talk to the uncles in the old log cabin. And I cooked, when they first arrived, I'd always cook them a meal.
Okay, I want to ask, what about Tom Gill? Did you know Tom Gill?
Oh, yeah.
Real
Okay,
Real
now, was
well.
he related to this Gill you were talking about a while ago? You had initials.
O.J.
O.J.
J.O. Gill, that was, I think he's
He was
dead.
the father.
That was the father.
The father.
Was he a bootlegger?
Yeah.
To a certain extent, yes.
He had to be. Johnny used to bring bottles home from up there all the time. And
Yeah.
he made
He was
his
a
own.
bootlegger.
He was
And
moved.
they all disappeared. Like everything else, I had them out in the yard and they just all
Disappeared,
disappeared.
people would swipe. I have one bottle, one flask, narrow flask type bottle that I dug up there, and it's turning real purple. I have it in my window now.
Bob, did he have mines? You know, going, not the road that's going to Queston now, beyond Lewis Ranch is Gill Hill.
Okay,
You
Gill,
remember? But not the road,
That
not the
was
paved road, it was up on the hill.
Gill Hill was the hill that was below the Molly Mine.
And we had a time making that in the winter time.
He had a cabin there. The old man and the son
They call
Tom
it-
had a cabin there.
It's still Gill Hill, we always say Gill Hill,
And,
but you don't travel it
He
anymore.
was blind.
Huh?
See, the one was blind.
Yes, we stopped there one
We
time,
stopped there
Walter and I
once.
stopped, and, because we knew him, and we went over to the cabin, knocked on the door, and he crawled to the door, he was blind.
But it was a
No,
real
he
sharp
was
little
very-
hill that went up and twisted at the bottom and went up and was on the left-hand side, stayed up all the way across the Sulphur Gulch, the Molly Mine, and then dropped back down to the bottom of that cliff there where the, well, it used to be the main road into
It's hard
town.
to
It was
make.
right there. Yeah, it was. It was like Goat
It
Hill.
was hard to make.
The days of the Model Ts and the cars on Goat Hill, you'd get up halfway and they had a place where you would pull out, and it was so steep the gas on your Model T, you couldn't get gas to your engine. It'd flood out or die out for lack of gas. You could back in there and turn around and back up the rest of Goat Hill to get to the top of it. And that's why they call it Goat Hill. Got everybody's goat.
While I'm thinking of it here, I have a question. It's Crow's niece, would she still be living?
I don't know. I haven't seen or heard of them in 10 years.
I just wondered, you know, if there was an
Back
address
in
we
the
could contact
70s.
her just to get information.
Or
Or a
not
record.
any idea if she'd
I
still
don't
be
know.
living or not.
Anybody else?
I doubt it.
Well, I have another question. When these miners, your uncle, how did they get supplies? Did they come down into the...
Trade
to
them in
the
on their
city?
back. Or they would rent a horse and pack in supplies to last several months. But they didn't ever keep a horse up there. The only one that ever kept an animal was old Pete Del Dorso, and he always had a burro. He had that little old white burro that he pastured down in Queston in the wintertime, and he'd pack the burro and go up to his cabin, and then when he got older, why, he'd even climb on behind the pack and ride the poor burro up the steep hills going up Bitter Creek.
Well,
Up
in
the top
later
of it.
years, right, the others had horses.
Remember Dr. Chambers?
And we would take their supplies up.
Oh,
Reggie
you would
grandson
take their
of
We
supplies
would
up?
take, yes, we would take their supplies up.
Now, would most of these men just stay here in the summertime? Or would they stay there during the winter?
Most of them stayed in the
Just
summer.
the summer.
When
They
they were
stayed in the
younger,
summer.
they stayed the year round. Now, Pete Del Dorso had a claim up above the Carabel, and he always claimed he knew where the mother lode to the Carabel was, but he and the Crafts didn't get along, period. In fact, they wouldn't even let him go up the canyon, follow up their road to go back to his cabin. They made him make a trail, took off right down there by old Crow's place, and he had to build a trail up along the side of the mountain to get back to his claim back there. He had a piece of quartz about 6 inches in diameter roughly, and was real laced with gold. It had lots of native gold in it. You could see it. And he always said, this is the mother lode of the Carabel. If you can ever buy it or get a hold of the property or get the blinky blank crafts out of it, we'll make a fortune off of it. But he said, I know where it is, and I got it covered, and they'll never find it. And he died, and it's never been found. But it's on their
Makes
claim.
an awful good story.
That's why they believe
It's on their
it.
it's on Carabel property up there
Carabel
where you can see where they've cut out the trees. Somewhere up there, it's on Carabel property.